Hi, and welcome back to Pull the Lever, a companion commentary series about The Emperor's New Groove, presented by me, Christopher Bingham. The Emperor's New Groove is famously one of the most disastrous feature productions in Disney's history. And in this episode, I'm going to discuss that process in detail, the failures, the heartbreak, and the decisions that made it the film we know today. At the end, I'll share my perspective on the whole thing, and talk about how this story helped me in my own career.
3 liquors wearing pants, plate of hot air, basket of grandma's breakfast, and change the bull to a gill. Got it.
In the last video I talked about my sources, but it's worth mentioning that this video particularly references 2 of them. The first is the Sweatbox, the second is the Vulture Oral History. The Sweatbox is a feature-length, behind-the-scenes documentary directed by Trudie Styler. Segments of it were incorporated into the DVD extras and promotional materials, and a full version of it was screened once or twice and then completely buried, only viewable now as a leaked rough cut online. In a way, this episode is more an analysis of the Sweatbox than it is of The Emperor's New Groove. And this is key to something that runs through the whole series. The existence of the Sweatbox is yet another thing that makes The Emperor's New Groove so unique. The level of access that we have, and the candid nature of that access, is unprecedented. Speaking about the documentary years later, Tracy Miller-Zarnecki said, "I swear, they probably had 150 hours of footage. The access was unheard of." There is so much to learn from the Sweatbox if you're interested in or want to work in animation. We see seasoned professionals talking about everything from the importance of voice acting to showing us working style and anatomy guides. We see the story team visually blocking out the narrative. We get a really good insight into the non-linear development approach with every department working at the same time, and how this can be both good and sometimes really bad for a production. We come to understand animators as actors themselves. You know, they use words like casting when they're speaking about supervising animators for a character, just as much as when they're talking about the voice actor.
Being an animator really means being an actor.
Little things like seeing animators work with mirrors in their offices. We see the international workflow when they visit the offices in France. At about 13 minutes in, there's this amazing discussion of the philosophy behind the design of the backgrounds, which I think is really valuable.
We're really trying to concentrate on what we call a pool of light, and all your detail should be focused in the pool of light where the action is, and that's the main focus. And a good background painting feels like an empty set, you know, an empty stage, like something's missing because the character's not there. When you put the character in, it's complete.
It also depicts creative conflict, and in painful detail, the collapse of Kingdom of the Sun, the movie that started development in 1994 and was later completely overhauled. A horrible experience for some, but one that, as we've discussed, had to happen to make Emperor's New Groove.
Hey, I've been turned into a cow. Can I go home?
You're excused. Anyone else?
No, we're good. We're good.
The documentary was directed by Trudie Styler, Sting's wife, and Gordo's journey of disillusionment dominates the film. It opens with Sting describing how he was approached in 1997 to work on the project, and then Roger Allers speaking about early influences like South America and Incan mythology. Roger pitches the original version to Sting, the Ruritanian romance, the Prince Pauper switch, and he loves it. So here's a rough timeline. In 1994, Roger Allers and co-writer Matthew Jacobs start developing the story. In 1996, they take some artists on a research trip to Machu Picchu. In 97, producer Randy Fulmer approaches and attaches Mark Dindal as co-director, who had just finished up on Cats Don't Dance. This is also the year Sting comes aboard. The film development is board-driven, with the director, artists, and writers all collaborating to mold it visually. As a result, there isn't much of a solid script, and it's constantly evolving. Sting partners up with David Hartley, ostensibly so the work won't sound too much like regular Sting songs, and they seem to have a generally fun time working together. Sting is raring to go, and from what I've read, seemed often to be racing too far ahead of production, resulting in dead ends and rewrites.
I was writing songs in the dark, really, based on sort of hearsay of what the film was going to be. There was no hard script.
A lot of tension, more than is present in the Sweatbox, seems to arise from Sting misjudging how the process would work, which is totally understandable. You might reasonably expect, in his position, to be handed a finished story outline on day one, go and write your songs, then record, maybe there are some revisions, some rewrites, and then you're done, right? But in reality, you've signed on to live in this limbo with the production for as long as is necessary while they get their shit together. Interviewed for the Vulture piece, Randy Fulmer said, "It was a bumpy ride. He quit about 5 times, and I talked him into staying 5 times." Meanwhile, during production, Pocahontas and The Hunchback of Notre Dame have been released and seen disappointing numbers at the box office. This is cited a lot as a significant influence on the direction of Kingdom, and possibly the reason Mark Dindal was hired in the first place, to try and liven it up and make it more fun. But it started to seem like Allers and Dindal were just making 2 different movies. Test audiences didn't respond well to its grand, self-important aspects, while at the same time laughing and having a great time during the sillier scenes put together by Dindal. And although it's often not stated in such clear terms, I think you can feel this tension in some of the early Sweatbox talking heads.
But I think that the studio in recent years has really opened up and said, we don't want to keep making the same sort of film, and have given really the people in the studio a lot of artistic license to different sorts of stories.
Production marches on, with Sting continuing to write songs where he pronounces llama weird.
The llama walks so proud, the llama holds his head in the cloud. All along the mountain trail, you're walking like a llama, then you just can't feel.
We also see early signs of him getting frustrated with the process.
It's not a different musical theme, it's basically a thought process reflected in the music. I'm telling a story, and what you've done here, you've taken out the 2 lines that encapsulate the whole thing.
Then we see the fateful Sweatbox screening, where a full run of the movie is strung together in whatever state it's in and screened for the executives. This means it's a mix of animatics and partially animated sequences, often with temporary voice recordings where the director might be standing in for an actor, and with very little or temporary music and sound effects. We see the nervous excitement of the team entering the theater, and we see the brutal outcome.
I just don't know who I'm supposed to care about, what I'm watching. The pace seems really, really wacky, like just so leaden, and I'm not having much fun.
And we have not found a movie yet.
This is the summer of 1998, 4 years since the start of the project and over 2 years into actual production, with at least $25 million already spent.
Story-wise, for me, we're between 2 stools. We're neither a comedy, we're not a drama, we're not a this, we're not a that.
And this is where my timeline gets a little bit messy because different sources have kind of different things included and omitted. But all the following things happen in quick succession. Fulmer is warned the production is very close to being shut down. Allers asks for a 6 to 12 month extension to finish the movie and is told no. They spend about a month in what Fulmer calls story hell, during which time they get an amazing circle of other directors and writers in for some brainstorming.
We've been in story hell sort of for a month, trying to come up with better versions that included the original story.
Then the crew is split into teams for a sort of bake-off, as a creative exercise to try and fix the movie. This is skirted around in the Sweatbox doc, but explicitly described in the Vulture article, with Don Hahn saying, "It was a bake-off, plain and simple." Roger Allers leads a group that simplifies and reshapes the existing narrative, and Mark Dindal spins out a wildly different version. Sting is still writing songs, by the way, and it's so depressing to watch because they're for characters that are about to get cut, like Quacker. Roger Allers asks to leave the project. And it's really heartbreaking to see. You know, this guy has been on this project, this has been his creative life, his 9 to 5, for several years. He has to come to terms with the fact that his version of the story is never going to be made. But don't feel too bad, okay? He gets to go next door and hang out with the Lilo and Stitch team. Then Fulmer and Dindal really just tear the whole thing down, leaving only a handful of core elements standing. David Spade as Manco, soon Kuzco, Eartha Kitt as Yzma, the llama transformation, and the setting. At this point, they have just 18 months to finish the movie. In many tellings of this story, a lot of importance is attached to a licensing deal with McDonald's for tie-in Happy Meal toys, which would incur serious penalties if Disney had to break it. But there's also just the cost of the film, right? Which increases every day. A simple, obvious lesson that unfortunately many producers have to learn the hard way is that scheduling and deadlines are a budget thing. Those overheads, that building you're in, the salaries of the artists, the time in the studio. Or, think of it on a smaller scale, right? Your home office, your equipment, your Adobe subscription, even working on your own, these things continue to add up regardless of how much progress you're making. So that extra 6 months carries a hefty price tag. $100 million is the official budget for this film, but if they'd made this decision sooner, it might have been a $50 or $60 million movie. Bottom line, even without the Happy Meals, this film needed to get finished.
And you hope against all hope every time you go in the process of making these that you will avoid this step, whether it be Lion King or Beauty and the Beast or Aladdin. Oh my God, this is a disaster, we've got to start again. It's a complete failure. And you have this naive belief that that won't ever happen.
So the team is shuffled a bit and they get back to work. Mark Dindal is now the sole director. The movie has been subtly retitled for some reason to Kingdom in the Sun. Goodbye Huaca, Goodbye Nina and Marta, Hello Kronk, Hello Bucky. Production starts to speed up, all while the script is still being radically revised on a regular basis. They try out a big chunk of story where Kuzco gets trapped in the village and meets tons of different villagers, then it gets removed. There's quite a long deleted sequence on the Blu-ray where we meet Pacha's elderly father who's living with them, and he's like a crackpot inventor, and they have this stoner neighbor who comes by unannounced. At one point, Adam West is in it as a crazy guy called Mochi, who lives in the village and claims to have an army, but it turns out to just be a bunch of, scarecrows and stuffed animals. That gets cut. Again, don't worry too much. They put Adam West in Chicken Little to make up for it.
The sky is falling.
Commander Little, no!
Please call me Ace.
Sometimes I'd walk by and they just have a meeting and Mark would look like, Doug, we need to tell you something. I think Chicha may have been killed off. Whatever's best for the story, just let me know what's going on. And then I'd walk through a couple weeks later and Randy would come in and he'd say, you'll be happy to know that Chicha is in the film. Not a lot of her, but she's in the film. So I said, okay. And then Mark would come by and he'd say, you know what? We've just increased Chicha by 100%. There's a lot of Chicha in the film. And then the next week, Mark would say, Doug, we gotta sit down. Chicha's back in the grave.
The process was so fluid that The Emperor's New Groove never had a script. That's right, they just had boxes and boxes of notes, random loose pages, boards, scribbles. In an anecdote that really highlights how chaotic it was, screenwriter David Reynolds says that 2 weeks after it opened in theaters, an intern came up to his office looking for a copy of the script. He says he's from archives and he needs a copy of the script because they never sent one down. And Reynolds has to break it to him that it doesn't exist. He can have all of the boxes, he can take whatever he wants, but they never had a bound script. So to remedy this, the archive team kind of just write one themselves. They draw it all together from what they have, and they make one themselves, and they put David Reynolds' name on it. Wild. Absolutely wild.
It keeps changing, and therefore it will change and change and change and change, and it is that additive process that keeps making it
Although
fresh.
I don't recall one that quite has changed. We always say, oh, this is normal. Everything's like, we've never been through this before.
Later that year, the team get another milestone screening, and this time, the feedback is positive.
This group may have come in with reduced expectations. Trust me.
All I can say is I had no idea what I was walking into. Even I had no idea.
What a great surprise.
It was a great surprise.
The more I read about this last year of production, the more astonished I became at just how many changes they managed to make and still get it to the artists and through the booth and to France and back in time for release. Although they did end up getting a 6-month extension after all, releasing for Christmas instead of summer, to the detriment of Dinosaur, may she rest in peace.
Schedule's been really, really ramping up to the point where we're racing through these scenes.
They screen the entire movie, again in a mixed story reel for everybody. And there's only one last big hurdle with the narrative. They receive an open letter from Sting complaining about the ending, which you can actually watch the animatic for on the Blu-ray.
I've been aware for a while now that my vision of the world and Disney's may be at odds. I can only be candid, but there's something intrinsically faulty with this film.
In that version, Kuzco still builds his huge summer water park, just on the next hill over. The team seem to recognize that that misses the moral mark, and they fix it. Then they do their first test screening, and the one big thing that still isn't working is the music.
We're gonna have to redo almost all of it, I think, in a way.
Yeah.
The score just wasn't supporting the script, making it leaden and less funny, which can very easily happen. I've experienced it several times, where you're going crazy trying to figure out what's wrong, only to finally realize it's the music. So that was strangely comforting to see that it happens to seasoned Disney professionals too. The back end of the Sweatbox is mostly concerned with Sting and David, clearly weary of the process, writing My Funny Friend and Me, a song that doesn't match the tone of the final film at all, and feels more or less forgotten in the Disney songbook. And then it's over. Against all odds, after almost 6 years, The Emperor's New Groove is released to the public.
Long ago, in a faraway land, there was a prosperous kingdom ruled by a young emperor.
Boom, baby!
And after watching the Sweatbox, you might be left with a bad taste in your mouth. The outsider's perspective looking in on this process is really unflattering, and you can see a million little reasons Disney wouldn't be thrilled to share it. But here's the thing. I don't think the making of Emperor's New Groove was really that bad. They admit themselves it's an extreme case, but this is just how Disney movies got made at that time. A highly iterative, sometimes highly destructive process of building and tearing down. New Groove's production wasn't actually that bad, it's just that we got to see it up close. Our unprecedented access because of the Sweatbox gives us a distorted view. And something kept turning up as I was researching this video that supports this. Remember Roger Allers, the original director of Kingdom of the Sun? He's all sad and leaves the production and wanders down the beach in these sad cutaways. But Roger Allers was the Mark Dindal of The Lion King.
Roger had worked on Lion King and seen this happen to somebody else.
The Lion King, which started out as a borderline nature documentary, and then it was about a big battle between lions and baboons, and Scar was a baboon, and the original director left because he didn't want it to become a musical, and Roger Allers came on with a fresh perspective and made it the film we know. Katzenberg threw out the first version of Beauty and the Beast, and then the director left the project, and they got another set of people in. As crazy as it sounds, this is how all these movies were produced. So although it makes for an attention-grabbing headline, I don't actually believe that Emperor's New Groove was the most disastrous project in the history of Disney. It's just the one we know the most about. When I watched the Sweatbox for the first time, it had the opposite effect on me. It was December of 2023. I'd recently left Eddsworld, and for several months I felt pretty burned out. I took myself off to the middle of nowhere for a month to kind of be a hermit and work on my own stuff. And I was scrolling one day and came across this fascinating story about a film that I've always loved. I tracked down a copy of the Sweatbox, and I sat and watched the whole thing huddled over my laptop with a blanket. And even though at times the documentary was really hard to watch, right? It's very easy to sympathize with people like Roger Allers, who are genuinely attached to their vision and want it to succeed. But I had this other, more powerful sensation. Time and again, we cut back to the story room. We see different combinations of people participating in this problem-solving creative process, showing up day in, day out, and trying to find the story, trying to uncover what it is that they're making. And here in this, freezing cold holiday let thousands of miles from my home, all alone in the dark, I experienced this crystallizing moment of that's where I want to be. That is what I want to be doing. In spite of the heartbreak, in spite of the trial and error and the compromises and the failures, including it even, because it's necessary. That there was the room I wanted to be in. And I want to thank all of these people who had to go through all of this, you know, because it means so much to me. That's how 22 years after I first saw it on home video, a ridiculous movie about a talking llama helped me realize what I want to do for the rest of my life. Thank you for listening to this episode of Pull the Lever. In the next and final installment, I'm going to draw together what we've learned from Emperor's New Groove and what we've learned from the Sweatbox and see how it can impact our own creativity. Plus, I'll round out the series with a bunch of extra notes and trivia.